All right. Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Awesome. Great. I hope you liked my very professional fade down of the music there. Okay, welcome to React London's August meetup. So it's been a couple of months since our last one, but we've managed to gather together three amazing speakers from across the globe who are ready to talk to you about all things React. If you want to talk about what we're doing tonight on Twitter and things like that, then feel free to use the React London hashtag. If you are so inspired that you want to speak at the next meetup, then please get in contact at hello@react.london. If you want to read the code of contact, just knowing how to behave and how not to be an idiot, then feel free to read the code of conduct. And if you're interested in a job, then please contact jobs@redbadger.com. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Tim. I am someone who works at Red Badger, and we organize the React London meetups. Of course, we do this meetup out of the kindness of our own hearts, but more importantly, because we want to recruit people. So if you are someone who could possibly fill the engineering lead role, then apply. So we're looking for an engineering lead to join our digital product delivery function. We deliver high quality digital products, and yeah, just lots and lots of buzzwords in there, all the kind of things that maybe make you excited or maybe don't. So yeah, if you're interested, then get in touch. So the three talks we've got this evening: building scalable React micro frontends from Ruben, setting up feature flags with React with Talia, and presenting without sharing my screen from Sam. First off, some house rules. So number one, be kind. Everyone's just volunteering here. Everyone's given up their evening and put themselves out there and talking. So just be nice. Ask questions. So if you want to hit the Q&A button and you've got any questions for the speaker, then put them in there and we'll address questions at the end of every talk. And then do that social media thing if you like. However you want to get in touch, I think there's all the things that you need at the bottom, the @ and the hashtag. Next is a new segment I'm trying out, React News. So what's been happening in React world since the last meetup? It wouldn't be a presentation without a little fly in from the right there. So React version 17 release, which is so exciting, and it contains no new features. It's kind of the equivalent of getting a massive big box all wrapped up with a bow, opening it to find a tiny biro pen inside. But it does pave the way for future releases and for them to do some really cool things in that. So yeah, we wait with bated breath for version 18. Cool. Now on to the first talk, which is building scalable React micro frontends with Ruben. So I had a little blurb here somewhere. It's kind of buried underneath everything. Oh yeah, there we go. All right. Cool. Okay, so Ruben is a React developer at American Express. He is part of the One App core team, building and maintaining a new framework for server-side rendered micro frontends in React. He is very passionate about this topic and hopes you and your teams can benefit from this new front-end architecture. So please, everyone, welcome Ruben.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Okay, so let's get on to it. Brilliant. So yeah, so my name is Ruben again. I'm a software developer at American Express, and I'm really passionate about this topic. So I'm a front-end, micro front-ends advocate. I like to share this new architectural paradigm. And before we get started, I'm going to tell you a story. So let's imagine that is 5:30 on a Friday afternoon, and you have to deploy a fix to your application. And that fix is very important, so you definitely have to do it. And because we follow test-driven development. We have about 50,000 unit and integration tests, and the build might take about several hours or maybe a whole day. So you wait until the build is complete, and you're about to push that button. We don't push buttons anymore. We probably rely on the CI/CD. But let's say that you're about to push that button, and you get a text from another team member, and they say, "Oh, you know what? Do you remember that commit that we pushed last week to enable dark mode? Well, it hasn't been approved, so you can't release to production now because the changes are bundled." So at this point, what are you thinking? I know what you're thinking. You just want to cry. You just want to go home, enjoy your weekend. You don't know what to do. You have to abort the build, and you probably need to go home. You want to go home and change careers or something. And this might be just a very hypothetical scenario. I know there are some ways to fix these issues, like feature flagging, for example. We're going to look at that today. And also you can restructure your teams in a better way. But what if this is something that is happening to you? If it's something that is happening to you and you are part of a large team, you might benefit for a paradigm switch. And this is what I'm going to talk about tonight. And so in case you didn't notice, this talk is about micro frontends and React. So first of all, because it's the custom and everyone before they start a talk, they say the same. So micro frontends, just very quickly, is just a new way to build applications. It's a new architectural paradigm, a new design of way of creating front-end applications. And it's just basically splitting your front-end application into small, independently deployed, independently tested applications. You can say, if you're familiar with the microservices architecture, that this is just basically microservices, but for the front end. Now, what are the benefits? Because you don't just jump into a different architecture just for the sake of it. You probably need some benefits from this architecture. So the first benefit that you get with micro frontends is you get independent deployments. And this is very important because as the example I was explaining before, nothing worse than just depending on other teams for your deployments. Because you have independent deployments, you have an inherited reduced risk. So you only deploy to production what you changed, and you probably know this is one of the main rules in software development: is if it's not breaking, not broken, don't try to fix it. So you get quick fixes to production, and also simplified testing because you can focus on the individual functionality of your front ends and make sure that they behave how they're meant to. And you can also integrate them and have a test suite that runs just for regression purposes, but you can test your micro frontends individually. So that's number one. Now, number two, what you get with micro frontends is independent teams. So you could have, if you look at your structure of your company right now, for example, if you are part of a large company, you have the front end team and the back end team. And sometimes the back-end team is got a lot of teams that they make their own microservices and they handle different parts of the application. But on the front-end side, we still have a massive, what we call the monolith, and it's just one product. Everyone has to coordinate with everyone, make sure that you have release cycles, that you test properly, and that you don't touch something else. So with independent teams and micro frontends, you could separate them and actually have this full stack from backend to front end as a full ownership of one team. So one team can actually own the end-to-end of that feature and release it to production without having to coordinate with the other team. And also that avoids, obviously, dependency and interference with other teams because they are independent and they don't really care what the other teams are doing until they have to do some sort of integration. But at that point, your feature is already tested and ready to go to market. And obviously, that's another benefit. You go faster time to market, you get features quicker because you remove all the dependencies. That's number two. Now, number three, in terms of benefits is you have decoupled code bases. I don't know if you are like me when you arrive to a new project, or you have you've just been hired by a new company, and they say, okay, this is the front end, and it's a massive application. You don't know where to start. You don't know what page renders what, and you have to go through a whole code base to find what you're looking for. With micro frontends, you can actually decouple the code bases, and every single micro frontend has its own repository. So if you, for example, you want to make changes to the account section of the website, you know that there is an account repository, for example, that you can go and find the change that you have to make. Also reduces scope, because you know that you only have to make changes in the account section. You don't have to make changes somewhere else in the website. So it focuses as a developer and improves the developer experience, and avoids the accidental coupling. If it's something that you shouldn't touch, you don't touch it. So you don't have to care about the other sections of the website. You only touch what you need, which is the account section. And finally, the last benefit, and this is something that people don't talk about much when people talk about micro frontends, is reusability. Let's imagine that we have a community of developers that create React applications. At the moment, we have components, and those components are fine. But what if we have encapsulated user experiences that you can reuse, and then just bring them to your website, and you don't have to do anything else? It's just built by someone else, and it has all the APIs and everything needed for the application. An example of this could be like a flight scanner micro frontend that has all the logic to handle the different dates, airlines, etc. And that's built, and it looks nice, it looks great, but also handles all those API calls that need to happen in order for that tiny piece of UI to work. And it can be used by other applications, and it can be used by your own team. So if that team created the account section and they created a nice widget, that widget can be reused by another team. Great. And unfortunately, nothing is perfect, and micro frontends are not a silver bullet that are going to fix all your problems. But first of all, if you're a single developer, if you are working on just one project, you have just one team, micro frontends might not be the right approach for you. We're talking about scalability. We're talking about medium to large scale applications. So if that's the case, if you have a small application and you're on your own, maybe that's not ideal. But this works really well with large teams. However, there are some trade-offs, but trust me, the trade-offs are nothing comparable to the benefits that you get from micro frontends. So for example, one of the trade-offs is the complexity. If you are familiar with microservices, you know that there are more moving parts, more configurations, things that you have to do to make sure that all those microservices talk to each other. So there is a little bit of increased complexity, but if you're part of a large organization, that should be fine. And also it's a different paradigm. So you might need some training, or design your applications in a different way so you can benefit from this paradigm. Right. So I'm going to introduce, because this is our React meetup, is a framework. I'm part of the One App core team, and we designed this application, this framework, to create scalable micro frontends using React. And the main benefits of using One App is server-side rendered by default. So what is One App? One App is a new modular approach to web application development. And basically, yes. And why we decided to do this is because once you start to scale, your application might need that boost of having a framework that is going to help you scale and use micro frontends. So the One App framework has two parts. And the first part is there is a server that does the server-side rendering, and it's a Node.js server that basically handles all the requests, is the orchestrator that when a request comes in, it will assemble all the mini pieces of the UI, all the modules, as we call them, into the page. And that's what you send to the client. And the second part is holocron modules. and we call them holocron modules. Probably if you look at the Star Wars definition of what holocron is, you'll realize why we decided to call it a holocron. It's an independent, basically it's a micro front end. This is an independent application that can be tested, deployed independently. But when you combine multiple holocrons, you get the whole UI rendered on the page. So if you are a developer trying to use one app, you don't need to do anything on the server side of the application. You just create your holocron modules, and one app will render them server side and assemble them on the page. Okay, so what are the benefits of one app, or the features, sorry, of one app? So one app will provide modular design. Modular design is, provides code splitting by default. So every single module on your page will use code splitting, and it will have its own bundle, JavaScript bundle. So the bundle is small. We have a performance in mind, so we make sure that those bundle sizes are small, and you can even code split that module even further to make different chunks of JavaScript on application. And obviously the main feature is server-side rendering by default. So by default, all these micro front ends are server-side rendered. And we take care of, or we are really stress security and make sure that security is important, very important in the design of one app applications, because it's very important to have the best practices. For example, by default, one app will include the content security policy enabled by default. So you cannot talk to APIs that you are not allowed to talk to. And then the sub-resource integrity for all those JavaScript bundles I was talking about before, all that is enabled by default. And obviously, if it's a large application, you might need internationalization enabled. So one app will create all those language packs by default. You just need to translate your app in some very easy to customize JSON files, and one app will just output the bundles with the language packs. And also independent deployments. So every single holocron module has its own CI/CD pipeline. So you can deploy to production without restarting the server. So no server restarts. You just deploy that to a CDN, and the server will pick up that new JavaScript bundle, and you don't need to restart the server. Basically, the server is running somewhere in the background for you, and you don't have to touch it. You just deploy your micro front ends, which is a very big plus if you don't have to restart the server. You don't have to, you don't interfere with all the work that is happening. Okay, so I know I'm going really, really fast because I want to do a quick demo. We are really close to the demo. Let me just go back. I'm just going to share probably the production architectural diagram, just quick, so you can have a visual representation of the demo. So the modules are deployed to a CDN that can be stored anywhere, just any CDN provider. You can even deploy to different CDNs. You know, you can have one on Netlify, another one on Surge, or whatever CDN you decide to use. And there is a module map which has the list of all your modules. That module map is just basically, if you compare this to the package.json of your components of your npm packages, that has the list of your modules that are deployed to a production and all the versions and the locations on the CDN. Then what happens is the one app server will check that module map and then load the modules that are meant to be in production, load them into memory. And when the user requests a page and makes a request to the URL, the one app server is going to, the one app server is going to render them on the page and assemble them together. So that is what happens in production. Now, in development, we provide some tools to make this easier because, as I mentioned before, there is a server involved. And if you have been developing static applications, you'll be like, okay, there is a server, what do I do? So we provide a Docker image that provides the server functionality. Again, you don't have to do anything with Docker, or don't need to know Docker. is just running in the background for you, so it can serve your modules. And also we provide a local CDN that can serve the modules that you're working on locally. And we are going to have a look at that in the demo in a second. So again, you don't need to know anything about Docker. As long as Docker is installed, you can run the server. It's a very easy way to do that. There is an alternative, but it involves a couple of commands on the actual server to register your modules. So the Docker way is just the easy way. But if you're unable to download Docker, then there is another way to run the server. Great. I think we are ready to have a look at some React code, because I'm pretty sure that everyone, you don't want to just look at some slides on the screen. So let's have a look at this. I have a very interesting example here. And if you look on the left, you might be thinking, okay, what is this flat folder structure? To be honest, it doesn't have to be like that. You can store your modules in different folders. Obviously, they have their own repository. So at the moment, I have 3 modules here, the root module, child, and the grandchild. And they can be anywhere on your machine. They don't have to be part of the same root folder, as long as you can reference them locally. And also, you can have modules that are deployed to production, and you don't have to have them on your machine. The OneApp server will load them from the CDN and serve them on the page when you're not developing. So here we have. So we have the holocron root, which is basically our root module. This is where we set the configuration for our application, and we configure the routes and configure the other modules that are going to be rendered on the page. So I'm not going to go into detail, but basically what you do is, in this case, we have a root path, and that's just basically empty. That will render the root module. And then we have 2 routes here, a list route and a detail route. And at the same time, they invoke the 2 other holocrons. And remember, these 2 modules here, they can have their own Git repository somewhere. They can have their own CI/CD pipeline. They don't need to know about each other unless they interact. So they are completely independent on the page. So we render these modules on a route. So we render, for example, the detail route will render my first child module. And if we look at the first child module, we have just a very basic component there that is going to render some Star Wars stuff. They probably have seen the theme going on with Star Wars and Holocron. And it's going to render the grandchild. So the grandchild will render twice. You will render on a route, and also will be rendered by the first child module. And if you're familiar with React composition, which makes React really powerful, because you can basically reuse your components. One component can load another component and then reuse it as many times as you like. This allows that composition module to be extended even more by just combining all the business logic into a very composable, reusable module. Now let's see what's the output of this. So I'm in my root module, and the only thing I have to do is do npm start to start the server. That will use Docker to get the latest version of my server, run it in the background, and like coding never goes well. Let's see if this should work. And if you go to localhost 3000, okay, so we have, this is the root module. This is the first holocron that I created. I put a line, a border, so you can see where the module starts and ends. And the root module, again, is the entry point of your application. Now, from the root module, I navigate to this path, the list route. I have another module, just highlighted in red here. This one is the list module, and it has some Star Wars films. So you can see that this module renders the second one on this path. Now, if I click on one of these, it will render the third path in the detail route. And we have 3 modules right now. So we have the root module rendering the logo, the detail module renders some basic information about this fill. And if you can see, the list module is being reused. You can have the list module on its own here, but I'm actually reusing it from the detail module. So you can actually go back to the list underneath. This is a very basic example, but you can look at the structure and you can be like, okay, my application has really separate boundaries where I can just basically give this to a separate team and say, okay, team A, you are in charge of a detail module, and that's the only thing that you're in charge of. You only need to make sure that that calls the API and renders fine, and you can deploy that as many times as you like. And team B will be in charge of the list module, and they don't need to know anything about teams A. They can just create a separate application here, and that can be deployed independently. Okay, so this was a very quick introduction to micro frontends. One last thing I was going to show is, obviously, this is server-side rendered. So just to make sure that people see what's happening, this is React. And as you can see, is all server-side rendered enabled by default. So you can see that this is coming back from the server and the hydration is working. Cool. So very quick introduction. I'm going to probably ask some, if people have some questions, and I don't know, Tim, if you want to, if you have any questions ready for us.
First off, general like loud clapping and applause.
Thank you. I mean, this topic is very big, so unfortunately I try my best to compile everything like a really small 15 minutes talk. But yeah, this is probably have a follow-up at some point.
Awesome. Okay. So we do have I've got a couple of questions popping up. So the first one is, do you still share common components between modules, and how do you do it? E.g. a common button component.
Yes, you can. At that point, you can use an npm dependency. So if you have your like React library with all your common components, you can have an npm dependency shared across all the components. And to avoid the duplication, because we don't want those bundle sizes again going bigger by including a lot of dependencies again and again, OneApp has a feature called, well, actually it's from Webpack, where you can do your externals. So you can add to Webpack externals all those dependencies that are shared across all the modules. So they are not included in the bundle size of the modules, but of the root module in this case. That is the way that we do that at the moment.
Awesome. Next question. So there's tons of questions. I'm not sure how many we'll get through.
Cool.
But see how we do. From Julian, thanks for the presentation. When on the detail route, can you pass props to the list module from the detail module?
Yes, you can. So what you do is just pass the props from the router, and then you just use them to render. So that is something that we for example, there is an example module in the OneApp repository that we use for demo purposes. So you can have like a catch-all route that will render any given module, and you just pass the props to customize the way it looks. That's just one way of passing data to a module. So that is completely possible, yes.
Right, next up from Lucy. How do you handle state management across modules or micro frontends? For example, if each module needs to access the current user data.
Okay, so first, the state management, obviously you need some communication, but this is just a change of design and paradigm. Micro frontends, they should be as independent as possible. So they should call their own APIs, get their own data. They should be isolated as much as possible. There's obviously the case where you need to access data on the page and state on the page where you need access data from another module. In that case, there is a global store in this case for one app, is a global Redux store where you can pass data between components. So Holocron creates a global store that the app uses to do that communication. So for example, that's the way that we know what modules are loaded onto the page, what modules need to be rendered by using that store.
Next from Thomas, do you have solutions for sharing state or caching API requests between the micro frontends?
Yes, so basically that's the main issue with micro frontends and working with APIs is obviously you don't want, if the micro frontends are independent, you don't want to make duplicated API requests. So if, for example, the Star Wars, the detail module is already downloaded the data, you don't want to download the data again from the list module. In that case, we have a couple of libraries. One app doesn't prescribe you a solution for it. We have a couple of libraries that we use for caching, and it's basically the cache is stored in the global Redux store. So when a request comes in, if that cache is already present, downloaded by any of the other modules, if you use that cache instead. So we have one library right now that's called Awazu, and it's just basically handling that data fetching and cache mechanism, which is basically you can load data from REST, RPC of GraphQL, and it will hold the cache in the store, and then you don't have duplicated calls.
Nice. So one from Razvan. Great stuff. Thanks for that. How would you recommend handling a React upgrade?
Okay, so this one is a very different approach, because if you hear about micro frontends, you will hear people using different versions of libraries. Even, for example, there is a use case which is valid. This is again this is very opinionated from me, and he's saying that we don't want to have different versions or different frameworks acting on the same page, and that's just the way one app prescribed the micro frontend approach. So we don't have Vue and React and Angular or different versions on the same page. We just focus on React and one version of React. The application itself, the one app framework itself, has compatibilities between the modules. So if one module is not compatible with your React version, you can tag that module and say, okay, this module is only compatible with the version of the app up to this point. And if you try to load that module and your app has a different version, it will just not load it, and it will gracefully tell you when it's trying to load it, okay, this module is not available.
Okay, I'm taking two more questions, but there are quite a few more. I think we're going to have to invite you back to another talk at some point. But you can always provide written answers to those questions later. Sure. So two more. So how would this be incorporated within an application-wide state management framework, such as Redux?
How to avoid? Say the question again, because I'm not sure if I.
How would this be incorporated in an application-wide state management framework, such as Redux?
So one app uses Redux. I'm not sure if the question is to avoid Redux, but basically, people complain about Redux sometimes because they're trying to introduce Redux to their small application. I mean, Redux is better suited for large applications, like in this case, micro frontends. So one app uses Redux. That's the basis of the app, and we use Redux in the background for state management.
Okay, great. And final question from Thomas. Can we see the config file for linking to micro frontends?
Okay, so there is a difference. Let me just show you some code. So basically, you have in the root module, in development, let me just, this is not the right one. This is the first child. In the root module in development, you have the list of modules that you want to load in development. So at the moment, I'm loading the first child and the grandchild, and they are loaded locally, and it will combine them with any modules that are deployed to my application. Now in production, there is, as I mentioned, a file called the module map URL, which is the module maps, which is just basically a JSON file that has the list of all your modules deployed to production. And that's when you deploy, basically you just update this file and then point to the location of the CDN where your module is deployed in production. So there are two things. In development, you just add it to this array. In production, there is a file called the module map, which is just a basic JSON file that has the list of all your micro frontends developed deployed into production.
Okay, all right, that's, I think, all the questions we have time for. So everyone give it up behind your computers. Message, if you like, maybe in the chat, to give your appreciation for Ruben for an excellent talk. So thanks very much for that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, awesome. Right, let me just share my screen again. So next up, we have Talia giving a talk on setting up feature flags with React. Talia Nassi is an international keynote speaker who delivers content on all things testing and quality. She's a developer advocate at Split.io, where she works closely with engineering teams globally to ship software more efficiently. She's passionate about feature flagging, canary launches, CI/CD, testing in production, and A/B testing. She's spoken at countless conferences internationally, ranging from audiences of 100 to 4,000. So I give it up to Talia to take over.
Thank you. I'm Talia. I'm just gonna share my screen here. Cool. Let's see. You guys can all see my slide?
Yeah, looks good.
Perfect. All right, so we're gonna get started, and I want to start off by setting the stage a little bit. So let's say that I'm a front-end developer, and I am working on this to-do list app. And right now, my users only have the ability to add tasks to the list, and I want to add the ability to delete. So adding this feature requires some back-end work because I need a new API endpoint. And I don't know if the back-end change is going to be ready in time, but here's what I've done so far. So I have this conditional statement set, and by default, the user is not allowed to delete. And this is the current state. And then when I test this locally, I flip this Boolean to true to test stuff out. And then once the backend is ready and I want my users to be able to see the delete button, then I'll just push this commit with the Boolean equal to true. And what's great about this is that if there's bugs with the backend API or if something goes wrong, it's relatively easy for me to just temporarily roll back this change, fix it, and then push up a new change, right? So what I've basically created here is a super basic example of a feature flag. And a feature flag is pretty much a piece of code that lets you separate code deployment from feature release. And there's so many different use cases for this. We just saw one example of how we'd want to use this. Like if different parts of a feature are not ready and you want to wait until the entire feature is ready before you do a feature release. You can also use feature flags to test features in production to ensure proper functionality. You can use it to perform A/B testing to figure out which version of a feature gives you a higher conversion rate. And then you can use them as a kill switch, which allows you to turn off a feature for everyone in case something goes wrong and you need to hide that feature. You can use it for subscription management to manage permissions for specific user groups. You can use them for a canary release or percentage rollout where the feature is only initially made available to just a small subset of users in the user base so that if there's any technical issues, they'll be identified and resolved before it's made to the entire user base. And then you can also use this to migrate your monolith to microservices in just a safe and controlled way. So there's a lot more, but I hope you understand what a feature flag is and its capabilities. And why do we care about these? Why are feature flags so important? Because they allow you to improve your ability to develop, test, and deliver new features while minimizing risk. And this is just a very good foundation for continuous delivery. And this is how you can impact the measure of your changes. So feature flags allow you to directly correlate the impact of your changes by pushing information about the feature flags to the internal analytics system. So your business decisions should be based off of data, and using a smart feature flagging system will give you that data to have a successful business and to make the right changes for your users. So in your feature flagging system, this is what it looks like in Split. You can see you can set who sees which feature without ever committing new code. And this is really great for like product owners and non-technical people, because they can control the user experience without having to ask the developers to commit new code. And it also supports like multiple projects and environments, while you can target users based on the information that you provide. So going back to our example, if I want to roll out this delete functionality and I want to roll it out in a controlled way using feature flags, the basic feature flag thing I had previously, like that if else statement, it was fine. But if I use a feature flagging system, I get way more control, and I can turn things on and off without touching code, without pushing up new code. I can also target specific users or types of users. And in Split, these possible states of what your user can see are called treatments. And so for this demo app, the treatment controls who can delete tasks. So in our case, when the treatment is on, I'm saying you can delete tasks. You have the on treatment. And then when the treatment's off, the user will not be able to delete tasks. And this is what it would look like in each case. So what I had before, this if else statement, this is the like super hacky way to do it, because like you're hard coding whether or not the user can delete, and you have to keep changing your code. So this is the right way to do it in React, where depending on the value of the prop, you're either going to show the delete button or you're not going to show it. So what we're going to do today is create a feature flag, install the dependencies, configure your React app, instantiate and use the SDK, and then at the end we'll talk about like best practices to like pull everything in together. So the first step is to create a feature flag, and I'm going to show you how to do it in Split, but like a lot of the feature flag providers, like it's all pretty much the same UI, so this should be standard across like any feature flag management tool that you use. So after you log in, you'll see a button that says create your split, which is another word for feature flag. And then once you click on that, you're going to be prompted to enter some details about the flag. And the first thing you need to do is name your flag. And this is exactly the name that'll be in your code. And you should be pretty descriptive of like what the flag is doing. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit later on when I talk about best practices, but just notice here that the name of my flag that I'm creating is Talia to-do list delete, and that's what I'm going to put inside of my code later. And then you also want to select a traffic type, and this is what differentiates the people who can see your feature and the people who don't see your feature. So this can be by user, location, device. So if you want to roll something out for like only iOS, then you can put device and then select iOS. If you want to roll something out to like only people who are in Europe, then you can select location and only target people who are in that location. So this is pretty customizable. And then in my example, I'm saying I want myself and my developers to be able to delete, and everyone else gets the default existing behavior of only being able to add tasks. So if you look in the targeting rules, I have me and developers. So if your name is not here, you then move on to the default, which is off. So next we want to install the dependencies, and there's just one that Split provides, and it's just basically the tool that is used for feature flagging. And you just want to install this in your root folder, pretty standard. And then you want to instantiate and use the SDK, and this is where the fun kind of begins. So the first thing you need to do is import the JavaScript SDK. So at the top of your component, you want to import Split treatments and with Split factory from Split. So Split treatments is a React component that performs feature evaluation, and we're going to use this in our render function. And then the with Split factory higher order component is used to wrap the to-do list component when I export it. So I split up my render function in two. And in the first one, I returned the treatment and configuration from split treatments. And then in the names prop, I pass in the name of my feature flag that I created from the UI. So then in the second render function, I created a variable named allow_delete that differentiates between treatment on and off. So again, if I'm saying if the treatment's on, you're allowing the user to delete tasks. And if the treatment's off, then there's no option to delete. And then I have a function called create tasks that gets called in my render function and conditionally renders the delete button if the allow_delete variable is set to true. So after the render functions, this is where like I entered the configuration that I'm going to use to configure my split instance, and that initializes with split factory, which is the entry point of the library. And what's important here is that each user is going to have their own authentication key, and you can find yours, authorization key, and you can find yours in the UI. And so in your configuration, the key parameter is telling split who the current user is. So in this case, when you run npm start, you're going to see the delete buttons because you're targeted in the flag. So remember previously I targeted myself, and now I'm telling my app like login as myself. And then I'm going to see the delete buttons, as you can see on the right, because I'm targeted. And then when you set debug to true in the configuration, you can see all the logs from split in the browser console. And you should pay attention to two things here. The first is that you can clearly see that I'm the person who's getting the treatment. And the second is that you can see that the treatment is set to on for me. And now watch what happens when you change the key to a user who's not targeted in the split. You can see that the delete buttons disappear because this user, test.user@split.io, they're not targeted. So remember, only myself and developers are. So anyone else who tries to access this feature is not going to be able to access it because remember, the backend section isn't ready yet. The backend API isn't ready, and I'm waiting for the backend team. And notice in the console logs, I clearly see the treatment is off. And now I'm getting the default behavior because I'm logged in as someone who's not targeted. So I want to quickly go over best practices. Now we know what feature flags are, we know how to implement them, and I just want to go over best practices. So when we look at the feature flag lifecycle, we have 4 stages: creation, implementation, rollout, and cleanup. And I just want to go through each of these steps and talk about the best practices for each section. So the first step is creation. And the first step of creating a feature flag is to create a naming convention. And there's a few options you can choose from. And some of the things you can do are include the ticket number if you use like Jira or Asana or whatever management tool you use. Include the name of the service. Include the name of the team that the flag belongs to, include the name of the functionality. So like, what is this feature flag doing? And then you should also engage with the different stakeholders on your team to define something that makes sense for all of your teammates. And just be sure that there's clear ownership when you create this flag to reduce friction later on. And something I always like to say is like, if you don't have a concrete naming convention in place, it's like when you have siblings and your mom goes through every sibling before she correctly identifies you. Like, my name's Talia and I have a brother named Trevor and a brother named Tyler. And like growing up, if I would get in trouble, my mom would go, Trevor, Tyler, Talia. Like she would go through like all of the siblings before she got to me. And you don't want that to happen to your feature flags. You don't have to go through like 100 feature flags and figure out like which one you need. You want to look at one, know what it's doing by its name. And that just like provides consistency. So consistency is key here. If you start out with one naming convention, be sure to keep that consistency throughout your project, and that's just going to help you like avoid confusion later on. And then the next step is implementation. So there's a few things to remember here. Your changes to your feature flags should be treated like code deploys. So if you require in your code base 2 code reviews before someone gets to merge their code to master, then you should also have 2 reviews for any configuration changes to your feature flags. Even though you're not writing code in the feature flagging system, the changes you make here directly impact your users in production. So you just want to be really careful. And so by having the same approval process, you prevent people from making a change to the configuration of a flag that they don't own or that they meant to make for a different flag. And this prevents mistakes that could have been solved with by using these approval flows that are integrated within Split or within your other feature flagging framework. And then you also want to make your flagging decisions on the server. And this is a good idea because it does three things. So the first is that because single page applications are already making a server-side call to render the data needed for the UI, you can make a call to the feature flag service at the same time so that one network call fetches all the feature flag evaluations with the server-side data. And then if you have to kill a feature for some reason, like how would your client-side feature flagging system find out? Like, would you pull for updates or like, what would you do? So keeping your decisions on the server helps to reduce the changes of cache invalidation. And then lastly, making these decisions on the server side significantly decreases the complexity of the feature flagging system. So it's just a best practice to do it on the server side. And then you don't want to change the scope of your components just to support feature flagging decisions. So your flagging decisions should be encapsulated as much as possible while making your flagging decision as close to the logic as you can, thereby avoiding the need for every part of your code base to be aware of every component. And then when you're testing feature flags, it can be overwhelming when you have a lot of flags and you don't know like which combinations to test, or you don't know what flags are going to impact other flags. So it's important to ask your product owner, talk to your product owner. Sorry, my dog is like freaking out right now. Ask your product owner which combination of flags brings you the most business and what's the most important combination for you to test. And then once you have that list of like the most important flags, the most important combinations, then you can use your automation users and target those users inside of the flag. And that way you can validate those test cases with those test users. Okay, the next step is rollout. Probably the most important thing here is that users should consistently have the same experience. So increasing exposure to a feature should not affect the current exposed population. So if Johnny sees treatment on and you slowly roll out the feature from 5% to 10%, then Johnny should still see the feature on. That increase should not affect the already exposed population. And then you want to build a feedback loop. So the great thing about feature flags is they allow you to make controlled changes to your systems, and then you can observe the impact of these changes and make adjustments as necessary. So if you turn on a feature for half your population and your metrics are showing a decrease in activity, then you should kill that feature and adjust as necessary. And then on the flip side, if the metrics show a high conversion rate, then you should keep that change and roll it out to everyone. So it's important to use the data from your feature flagging system to measure if you can move from a smaller percentage to a bigger percentage rollout or vice versa. And then you also want to set up alerts to page you when you get any statistically significant changes. So if your business metrics are being really badly impacted by any change, you should be getting pretty violent alerts through like PagerDuty or whatever application you use. And then on the flip side, if you get like neutral or positive results, maybe you can just set up like an email alert or something like a little bit less aggressive. And then the last step of your feature flagging lifecycle is cleanup. So you definitely don't want to be stuck with 100 feature flags that like served their purpose and then were just forgotten about. Something super useful you can do when thinking about removing a flag is assigning an expiration date for each flag. And once that time hits, you know, it's time to go back, delete the old code, delete the flag because it's already been rolled out to everyone. And then you also want to set up alerts in your feature flagging system that'll poke you when a flag is stale or hasn't had any impressions in a while. It's just kind of been sitting there. You want to be alerted about that. And then you can also like add a subtask to your backlog to retire the flag at the same time that the flag is created. So when you create the ticket in your backlog to create the flag, make sure you also create a ticket to delete the flag once you reach your definition of done. And then, of course, be sure to remove the old code when you delete the feature flag, because you don't want stale code in your code base. And that's it. So you've implemented a feature flag with React, and you've learned the best practices, and now you're all experts. So in the future, you could use this configuration to deploy all of your changes in a controlled fashion. You could also deploy to production while keeping the flag off by default, and you could test in production and ensure functionality in a safe way. And then once you know that it's working in production, you could release it incrementally or to all users at once, and you can do all this without any code changes. So I'm just going to include like some useful links. So I have a video on feature flag maintenance that kind of talks about what I talked about today, but in a different perspective. And then if you want to go ahead and try out feature flags, you can use Split.io for a free feature flagging account. And then I also have a repo that has all the code that I went through today. And this is my contact info, my email address, and my Twitter. If you guys have questions or comments, I can also answer things now. And that's it. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks, Talia. All right, so if anyone's got any questions, then of course use the Q&A button to ask them now. Just as a reminder, if you want to see the questions that were left outstanding that Ruben has very diligently answered with text responses, then you can go to the answered questions in that section. So kicking off with questions for Talia. First off, Hugo, if you use an external API like Split.io for fetching features, how do you make sure the features won't be impacted by ad blockers, network issues, etc.?
You test in production. All of the use cases that you can't replicate in like a dummy environment, you test in production.
All right, there you go. The beauty of feature flags and A/B tests. Cool. Next by Christopher. How does Split.io identify users in the developers list? Do you need to be logged into Split.io on the same browser?
Okay, so the way this works is it's just like a normal, normally you would have like a list of the developers' accounts or email addresses, or like a lot of users do like company account IDs. So those are like individual users. You could also add groups, but they would just be like configured inside of Split. So normally it's just like person by person, and you can add groups like developers or design or whatever, but they would have their own group within like Split or the configuration.
Okay, nice. Next from Iliad, on feature flags, we use simple JSON files that represent the config, fetched at runtime, and the flags are available as API response. The JSON configuration is deployed independently from the code. Don't you think it's better and more decoupled approach rather than using an external import?
What do you mean by, I don't understand the question. It's a better and more decoupled approach rather than using the external import. You mean Split?
I guess so.
No.
I'm kind of stupid here, trying to guess.
I'm a developer advocate at Split. I'm going to say no.
All right, cool. Damn, this is the downside of this remote React. We can't get into a heated debate. But if you want to chat with Talia about this, then feel free to use the chat functionality, and maybe you can explain a little bit more what you mean. Cool, done. Thomas asks, can this feature flagging product be used to implement A/B testing or MVT? Multivariate testing, I think that is. Also, does it generate reports of feature enablement?
Yes and yes. So in the Split configuration page, you'll be able to link your feature flags to A/B tests or multivariate tests. There's a lot that you can add as many variates as you want. And there's a metrics report that's automatically generated with each A/B test. So that's all like within Split.
Right. Peter Mitchell asks, how do you keep flags in sync with the backend?
It's automatic. Yeah, it's automatic. Split does that for you.
That's easy. Done. Okay. And finally, Christopher asks, does Split manage the AV splitting, or do we need to manage that in our own environments?
Does Split manage the AV splitting? No, Split does that.
Okay.
Yep.
Done. Cool.
The Split full updates the feature flags. It's automatic, but when there's no connection, then it pulls every 15 minutes.
Done. Okay, I think that's everything. Nice. Thanks very much, Talia, again.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for featuring in our London meetup. Sorry, I had to get a pun somewhere. My pun count is very low this meetup, so I'm just trying to claw that back. Okay, let me just share my screen again. All right, okay, so our final talk, which we're going to go straight on with, is Presenting Without Sharing My Screen by Sam Larsen-Disney. So Sam currently works as a UX engineer at American Express. He has built new ways to refer friends, onboarding experiences, and rapid response systems. He enjoys teaching the next generation to code through his articles, presentations, and hackathons. So yeah, give it up for Sam.
Cool. Hello. I'm Sam. I'm going to share my screen, ironically, just for the recording, but I'm hoping we won't need it for too long. So again, hey, I'm Sam. I'm a UX engineer at American Express. And just to get it out of the way, all these expresses and do not represent the opinions of any entity whatsoever, which I have been, am now, or will be affiliated with. The title of my talk is Presenting Without Sharing My Screen, or Using React to Replace PowerPoint. And to kind of demo this presentation in itself is a POC. So if you would like to stop looking at the screen I'm currently sharing and go to follow.sld.codes, you can play along with this little game and have fun with the experiment. So I'm going to give you a minute to head over there. I see there's 22 people already here. But yeah, sure. Let's see if this works. This also is an experiment. I've never tried it with this many people before, but I'm hoping it will hold. So if the demo does break, we'll have to go back to showing the screen, but it kind of defeats the purpose if we do. So I'll give it just another 10 seconds. Got 60 odd people in here. Okay, cool. Well, let's get started then. So as you might have guessed from the title of this talk, PowerPoint and me are not friends. In fact, I might go as far as to say I hate it. Because I'm the kind of person who likes pixel perfection. I like to make things look perfectly accurate on the page. I also think that PowerPoint is overly complex to theme. I'm used to the developer world where we have access to Sass or CSS and we can make things pixel perfect with numbers as opposed to dragging and dropping. And that's my preferred way of doing things. And you know, when you start to think about PowerPoint and the errors with it, you have to ask yourself when it was born. Does anyone have a clue when it was born? Other panelists, any ideas? Ruben? No? Okay, all right. Well, PowerPoint is from 1987, so it's currently 33 years old and we're still using it. I'm not saying it's evidently stood the test of time, but there must be something else out there that's more friendly for us developers to present with. So I started searching. I started looking around and I had this question on my mind. And one thing I came across was MDX. MDX, for those of you who haven't heard of it before, is Markdown with JSX put together. And this is an awesome combination. And just to give you an insight, you can throw interactive charts, animations, or alerts onto your pages, intertwined between Markdown content. So it's super nice for us devs to use. Just to give you a quick example, this is just an example MDX file. We've got an H1 in Markdown and a paragraph on line 2. And then after that, we've just thrown some JSX into the middle. And that will all just run fine. We also import modules like we would in our React code. And then on line 4, you can see I'm just using it as you would any other React import. And this is really cool for blog posts. So I recently did a social distancing infographic poster where the time was counting up and there was all sorts of maths and calculations going on the page. And this was possible because I could create the component and then import it into my Markdown. But the heading 1 and the paragraph at the top of the page are just Markdown. And it's also great for design system documentation because you can have the description about your component and your component rendered next to each other looking nice and pretty. I've built my personal site in Gatsby.js. I'm not going to go into great detail about Gatsby because that's not what this talk is about, but I will just give a very quick overview. So Gatsby is a React static site generator. What that means is that Gatsby can generate pages for you. So you give Gatsby some content, you define a template, and then it will programmatically create pages from that React template for you. It also has this really cool plugin ecosystem and has this very cool plugin architecture, which is very plug and play. So you can abstract complex stuff away or get other people's plugins to do it for you. And when I was searching for plugins to use on my personal site, I came across Gatsby plugin MDX. And as you might guess from the name, what this allows us to do is use MDX in our presentation to, MDX in our site to create pages. And when I was searching for this, by pure chance, I also came across Gatsby theme MDX deck. And what this does is turn MDX into slide decks for us. This is really, really cool because we can create MDX content in a single file, separate it by 3 dashes, and these will become separate slides in our presentation. And this was the PowerPoint alternative I was looking for. I thought this was awesome, and I started using this in my presentations. Slides can be styled with CSS or Sass. They're performant because they're on my static site. I can host the slides as well, so I don't have to worry about getting to a venue and not knowing where my slides are because they're on my site. And we can customize the hell out of it because we can use React code to do it. So here's some of the fun things that I thought you could do, and I'm sure you guys have many other ideas, but here's some of the fun things I came up with that you can do in React components in slides. So the first one is using Lottie animations. So we can have confetti on the screen, and you as an end user, if you want more confetti, can hit the more button, and it doesn't really affect my presentation, but you get more confetti, which I think is great, kind of adding a little bit more interaction into slides. We can also have interactive code blocks. So if you're teaching HTML or React to in a lecture, you can potentially have interactive elements in your slides where people can play around and have a little go and try it for themselves as they go along. And I think an interactive slide deck might be a more memorable one. You know, the more interaction you can have with your users, the better. So I was there thinking, job done, right? End of the road, all good. Well, then coronavirus and social distancing happened, and suddenly the whole world changed, and I started to question and thought maybe the job isn't done. And so the whole world went online, and just like this meetup, we're all using video conferencing software instead of meeting in person. And when we look at like the average Zoom data usage per hour, streaming the video in HD quality takes 2.5 gigs an hour. SD is 0.7, sorry. But if it was just audio, it's 70 megs, right? And I know that Ruben was having trouble with his 3G network at the start of this, trying to stream that 2.5 gigs. I'm in a similar situation most of the time. I don't have fiber. There are other users on my network. I have an unreliable ISP. And on top of that, 9 times out of 10, I'm working on the VPN for work. And all of this kind of slows down my network, and my bandwidth gets bottlenecked a lot. And what that means is that when I'm presenting my slides, for those of you who want to hit the reality button, when this is kind of what it is like for most people, I think, viewing my presentations, and that's less than ideal. I prefer, you know, a less dial-up-y kind of feel. So the UX designer in me thinks this is less than ideal. I spend considerable time putting presentations together, and I think they deserve a proper delivery. So I suddenly had this brainwave. I was there thinking, you know, I'm giving my presentations with my slide decks that are hosted online. Why don't I just send people to those presentations and let them follow along as I present? And whenever I think of trying to create this kind of real-time behavior, I think about sockets. And And for those of you who don't know what a socket is a bi-directional communication channel between a client and a server, as opposed to HTTP, where you might be trying to continually poll the server to see if there's been a change. With sockets, the relationship is both ways, so your server can actually notify you when there's a change, which is super, super cool. And just to give you kind of like a little demo of what that's like, at the top, I've just got a little app.js that just emits a message to the server. And on the server, on line 7, you can see we're grabbing that message and we're just console logging it out. But we could also send a message back at that point as well. But what if we want to store this data, right? It's all good having a message come through from the server, but you know, one thing that came up earlier today is that we all like to store information, whether it's in one app or somewhere else. And one of the answers that came out of that was Redux. And you can combine this with Redux too. There is a really cool piece of middleware called Redux Socket.io. And on line 5, you can see I'm creating an instance of that. I'm passing it the socket, and then I'm passing it a little string that says server slash. And basically what that does is any actions that I dispatch that begin with server slash will be intercepted by this middleware and sent off to my server instead of going through the reducer in my store. If you want to, there's a link at the bottom of this page to go have a look at that in more detail. And then on the server side, you can see on line 10, I can just grab that action, I can console log it, or I can emit it back, or do anything I need to with that information. So with this, we can actually control the slide delivery, which is hopefully all of your decks are keeping up. I don't know how it's gonna work with this many sockets, but we'll give it a go. So controlling slide delivery. So what I've done is on the deck, which is rendered on all of your screens right now, there is on line 7, you can see this little if, and the if is if the index of the page you are on doesn't match the slide presentation, which is the one that I'm on, then it will change. Sorry, it's actually the other way around. So if your index, if the index of my page right now doesn't match the one on the server, I'm changing the presentation position on the server by dispatching an action on line 18, you can see down there, server slash update index, which pushes the new index up to the server. And then the server sees this and updates the index accordingly, and then it uses io.emit to tell everybody else that the index is now this one and not the old one. And then you as the end user, if you're in one of my presentation decks, which is what lines 6 and 7 are about, and your slide doesn't match the slide that I'm on, then it will jump you to the presentation slide I'm on. So whenever I'm clicking next on my presentation deck, it's sending it up to the server. The server is sending it back to you guys, and then your client is going, I'm not on the right slide, I'm going to change it. But you might have noticed in all of that, that would mean that anybody could emit a change in index, and suddenly that would cause chaos because everybody would be clicking next and the slides would go 1,000 miles an hour, or all sorts of weird orders could happen. Add a little environment variable on line 2 that you can see that, that basically says whether I basically verified that I am the person who should be presenting. So I just have a little password on the server, and at that point I identify to the server that I am the presenter. And then on line 17, when that index is updated, I just check whether the socket ID that is suggesting the update in index is the one that matches the one that I'm calling from. So this is kind of just like a little diagram of how it works. So I send my changes up to the server, and then you will get notified about the change, whether you're on your mobile device or your iPad or your laptop. Should all work nicely. But what if I'm going too fast? You know, if we're all in the same room, it's really easy to put your hand up and say, hang on, can you go back a slide just quickly? I had a question. But that doesn't really work when we're remote and there's not a two-way conversation going on. So what I decided to do was add an unfollow, which you can actually find in the corner of your screen. It's the padlock. If you click that, it will give you control of the slides again, so you can go back or forward and review at your own pace, and then you can lock it again to come back to where I am. And that's actually the easiest part to implement in all of this. All I did was add another boolean to our state that was follow, which you toggle on or off with that lock, and it will only trigger the jump of the slides if that follow boolean is true. So if we compare this to the Zoom solution, sharing your screen, it's 2.5 gigs if I want to share my screen per hour with Zoom. My solution is the cost of audio plus however big my site is, and that's it. So as you can see, this is really good for bandwidth in situations where you don't have great bandwidth. So for me, this is perfect. And you know, the stress on my network goes down, everybody downloads less, and the slide should be crystal clear for everybody because they're rendering on your machine. And sockets allow for even more crazy React components. And these ones are the ones that are going to break. If anything's going to break in this, this will be the bit. So I know that we have a Q&A in the thing, but you can actually do QAs in the presentation deck. And I won't answer these questions, but if you want to throw some fake ones in there, hashtag keep them clean. If you want to throw a question in there, yeah, you can see, if you come back and look at what my screen is sharing, I can actually see the questions that are coming in. So I could then answer them if I wanted to. Cool, awesome. Right, we can also do polls. So if you are working from home, you could potentially vote, and you should see, wow, 100% of you are all voting, they're all saying yes. Can someone say no, just to even it out a little bit? Yeah, there we go. All right, cool. So you can see, like, we can have interactive polls in here. So you've got like PolEV, you might have heard of. That's what my lecturer used when I was at university, but he would have to navigate away from his slides to set that up so that we could then do the poll, and we'd have to come back to the slides. But with this solution, we don't have to do that. We can also even have stats. I'm a big fan of stats pages, and I haven't done this one justice, but you could start to have stats in your slide deck about your slide deck, which I feel like is super meta. But yeah, so there's all sorts of crazy things you can do with this. I hope it inspires you a little bit. I then went kind of stupid with this. So I went to a conference called Half Stack in May that was online. And I heard Charlie Gerard talk. She's quite big on Twitter. She does a lot of crazy stuff with like scrolling with her eyes and stuff with like neural integration with JavaScript. Go and have a look, she does some crazy stuff. But she did a talk on PostNet. And what PostNet does is it uses your webcam to look at your skeleton and try and work out where it is. So you can see all the dots in this GIF are points that it's worked out where your limbs are, your elbows, your wrists, your nose is, etc. All that good stuff. And this kind of sparked my interest because I suddenly thought, when we're presenting, quite often we use our hands, and I've been doing it a lot during this presentation. I've been doing this, and you know, we could use that information to do something cool. So what I thought we could do is, if I gestured left or I gestured right, I could increment the slides backwards or forwards. In order to do this, PostNet's actually really easy to implement in JavaScript. In React 2, this code is not mine, I've stolen it. I link to it in the next couple of slides. But basically what we need to do is just pass a canvas that's got our webcam on it. And then on line 8, you can see I'm just calling the PostNet model, and it's estimating a single pose for me. And then it's just pushing that to the list of poses that it's got. And basically what that list looks like is something like this. So first it gives it a score, and that score is how confident PostNet is about the positions it's given you, and then it gives you a whole lot of key points. And it gives you a lot more than the left and the right wrist, but those are the two that I care about. And basically it gives you an X and Y position of where they are. And so what I decided to do was work out if they were both on the 25% on 25% of the screen or the 75th% of the screen. And that way I would know that that was the cutoff point as to whether I was gesturing right or gesturing left. And so both the left and the right wrist had to be over that line on both sides in order to trigger the slide jump. And you can see there that on line 11, I say set last punch. Basically, I wanted to throttle this connection a little bit, because otherwise, if I did this, suddenly my slides would machine done because it was like getting every frame. So basically, I've just said every half second if I'm doing this, then jump forward or backward. So that's kind of how I'm triggering the slide jumps. I'm not doing it in this talk, but there is a little GIF demo here, and there is a longer video if you want to see it in action. It really works, I promise you. Cool. And if you want to try it yourself, you can see the code I borrowed for the PostNet stuff there. And there are some further extensions I want to work on. So SEO isn't great on the presentations. I'd love to be able for you to find search for slides through Google. Calling through the app, that's the only bit that's holding me like to Zoom or WebEx or whatever it is. If I could get some way to project my voice across these slides, then there's actually no reason for me to tune in anymore. And then the final thing that I thought would be really cool that I haven't looked at in too much detail is sending sound to the clients. And this is more of an idea, I think, for when you have, you know, an audience in real life, but you could potentially use that socket connection that you've set up and send them all different notes and make them harmonize as an audience using their phones, or send them all applause soundtrack, and then it would sound like the audience really likes you, even if you're having a really terrible presentation. And yeah, that's kind of it. So that's all. You can find me on the interwebs. There's some dev links, some resources, and some credits down the bottom if you want to find out more about this stuff. If you have questions that I don't answer here, you can reach me on Twitter. But yeah, thanks for listening. The sockets work on the other panel, like for people. I mean, I didn't hear anything bad.
Is there any way to applaud through these slides?
No, someone mentioned that I should do, I think it's like an Instagram story thing, where people like have an Instagram live and little hearts fly up the corner of the screen.
Oh yeah.
Which I quite like the idea of doing.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
You could also just hard code that bit, just set to 1,000.
Yeah, I could.
Trigger happy.
People to think that it's doing better, I could, yeah.
No, that was awesome. All right, so quite a lot of love in the chat for that. So a few questions from Martin. Is this presentation library available on NPM? Is there any licensing around it? Basically, can we use it ourselves easily, especially internally within enterprise companies?
So the answer is a yes and a no. So I haven't actually finished the library yet, but it will be available super soon. The problem is this Gatsby plugin ecosystem that I've said is really great is actually hindering me a lot because it's all plugins that are good for Gatsby, but this also needs a server. So finding the right thing, the right place to put it and the right thing to call it is a little bit of a nightmare at the moment, but it's getting there. It is nearly done. So there is a smaller POC. In the meantime, if you want to try this out, my site is open source and has this on it. That's what you're looking at. And there's the server. I can link to the server as well. I think I actually have on my site an article about this in more detail, and you can see the code examples in there. So if you want to grab it, you can grab it off my site right now. If you wait a little bit and you follow me on Twitter, I promise I'll tweet about it in the near future when it is its own library. But I don't think it will just be as easy as an NPM install. There'll probably be more to it than that in terms of setup.
Cool. Well, if you need an incentive to get to version 1, I think you've got like 90 people right here who are willing to try it out, even as beta testers.
Yeah, that would be really cool.
Question from Alexei. What about using WebRTC and peer-to-peer?
Haven't thought about it at all. For me, right now, it was about kind of just making this work on a large scale. But I do like the idea of having just peer-to-peer, so I could give a slide deck to one person without everybody in the world who's on my site knowing that it's happening. But I haven't given it too much thought right now, but I do like the idea a lot. Maybe an extension to the library when I finally get it out there.
Nice. Julian, shut up and take my money, says. Okay, cool. All right. Any further questions? Give people just a few seconds to hammer out. This will mean you won't need a server, says Alexi.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, cool, worth considering. Okay, all right, I think that is it. So again, like applause, everyone please, like, yeah, show your love. And I'm gonna return back to my stupid PowerPoint slideshow. All right, here we go. So that is actually everything for this month's session. So thanks again to all our panelists, to Ruben, to Talia, and to Sam for volunteering their time and coming and giving such wonderful presentations. So thanks again for that, really appreciate it. If you want to talk at our next meetup, then get in touch. Look out for news on when our next meetup is. We've not been quite monthly recently because of things in the world, but we will aim to get back to you as soon as possible, and maybe in the real world at some point next year, as soon as we safely can anyway. But yeah, engage, stay engaged, do react, and see you soon. Thanks everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.